Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Shop Talk, hosted by the Triangle Area SQL Server Users Group. So tonight we have with us a whole cast and crowd. You are the crowd, the Greek chorus, if you will. And that means that you're going to have to say things in chat that we never pay attention to, and you will ultimately be right, but you will also be telling the things that the audience should obviously know. So, got that going for you. Disappearing and reappearing, we have Mr. Houdini himself, Mike Christensen.
Good evening. Thanks for coming.
Not disappearing, and with some additional lighting, Mala Mahadevan. How you doing, Mala?
Good evening, everyone.
And disappearing cat butt, which was on pre-show, but we want to leave that out so that Twitch doesn't ban us. Tracy Baggiano. How is it going, Tracy?
Well, all right. Yes, Quake has left the scene.
For now.
Hopefully not to come back for an hour.
Till we get terrorist assault cat butt.
Yeah, she just randomly will jump on the screen. Sorry, guys.
Which, if I were naming episodes of Shop Talk, that would definitely be the episode title.
You can always name it with a dash.
I mean, I could, but then I'd have to start something, and then I'd have to come up with names for every episode, and then it gets... That's a lot of work. But what we are going to talk about tonight, first off, let me see if this thing still works. TriPass wants you. Yes, it kind of still works. So we have, every year, board elections for the Triangle Area SQL Server Users Group, and this year... the board elections are going to be for 2 of the 5 positions. So there are 5 board members at TriPass. 3 of us got elected last year. 2 of us are up for renewal. The 2 who are up for renewal are Vice President of Membership and Vice President of Programs. If you are interested in running for one of these positions, Vice President of Membership, Mike, is the current VP of Membership, and will be running as well, and has a note here that I can't read, but it probably says vote for Pedro. Does it really say that?
It says vote for Mike with bad handwriting that's backwards.
Oh, okay. Well, you could also vote for Pedro.
Didn't know we needed to create campaign signs. Hang on a minute.
You might need to. Mike has already got his super PAC going, so he is a machine. It's a really old Lenovo, but he has a machine. Tracy, meanwhile, Vice President of Programs, is also up for re-election. And if
has no signs.
No signs yet, but that means she may be the incumbent that you could knock off.
Yeah, true.
I mean, if you're interested. If you are interested, please let me know through Meetup. And what we'll do is on December 2nd, I'm going to open voting for 2 weeks. Mostly because voting should have actually been opened last Thursday, but I forgot about it, being out of town. So we're going to bump it off till after Thanksgiving, and we'll have voting for 2 weeks. Anybody who's interested in running, let me know prior to December 2nd, and I'll send out a full blast to everybody in the TriPass group. That way everyone gets to see. Anybody who is a member at our meetup is eligible to vote in the upcoming election. It'll be a poll on our meetup. So we look forward to many of you voting on there and me harassing you until you do vote on there. That was my little spiel. Like I said, if you are interested in running for one of the board positions that are open, one of the 2 positions, let me know. Next up. Last couple of weeks have been kind of busy. Conference season is in full swing, and 2 weeks ago, we had Shop Talk. We talked about the first day of Pass Summit, the pre-con day. After that, we had another pre-con day, and we had 3 conference days. What did you folks think of it?
I had a blast at Summit.
I did too.
That was my fun. I had 2 pre-cons that I melted my brain on, plus the 3 days.
It seems like a lot of content there.
That's what it was.
What did you think about them releasing the pre-canned videos as a block?
What
It was
that, Kevin?
confusing.
Oh,
Because I did not know that ahead of time.
no, I knew it, but it was very, very poorly communicated. It was a mess because I had my own session and I moderated, I think, like 6 different sessions, um, including one pre-con. So it was the vast majority of people did not know that they had to watch it before they came to the discussions, and it was just towards the end, with the people I moderated on the last day, I asked them to, as soon as the session started, just kick off the talk, redo it. And when they have questions, we'll stop, we'll answer the questions. We'll go as far as we can go in half an hour. So that's what we did. In the last thing is that a second rendering of the same talk. Some people went fast and they were able to complete it in half an hour. Some people didn't, and there were more questions. But very few people in the audience knew that they had to come prepared. So that's a communication thing.
Yeah, I'm assuming it was communicated in the email, but people weren't reading their emails because I didn't read it.
That makes sense. When I went to my first Q&A, first Q&A I did was Wednesday. The second one was Thursday. I think I did have several people who, by the time my Q&A session happened, had seen the talk because I had one in the late afternoon, Eastern time. So that probably helped a bit because there was no way I was going to try to fit my talk into that 30-minute Q&A slot. So instead it was, hey, ask me questions about pretty much anything at all, and hopefully I'll have some answer for you. In other words, it's sort of like shop talk.
Oh, that's interesting. Well, everybody's not as versatile as you are, Kevin. To answer that.
Not everyone can vamp and wing it like me, which I don't even do that good a job of it. This is why I'm not a professional.
Well, I had a few people in my talk who had watched it, and it helped me hugely to have someone who knows, who knew the subject. So I had Louis Davidson and I had Arvind from Microsoft. Both of them hopped on to moderate, and we between the three of us, we had we hugely enjoyed talking, and they had a blast listening to us. So I got great feedback too for that.
Okay, great.
Yep.
So, Mike, what were your thoughts?
It was my first. So I really enjoyed it. I think some of the tech worked pretty smoothly. I understand that feedback from some of the moderation. I wasn't a moderator. I went to 2 open discussions on diversity and women in tech, and they were fantastic. The diversity one was just absolutely fantastic. Really good discussion. I went to some of the. I was trying. I think for me, I'm weak on as a less experienced person. I need performance. So I never heard of Hugo, and Hugo was fantastic.
Hugo is.
Yeah.
And then I learned a lot from Bert, and then I went to some of the PowerShell stuff, and then really enjoyed that. I did like the block release of some of the things. So, for example, I had a lightning talk, so I could look at the other lightning talks when Wednesday came up, when I had time or if there was a break. So I liked that. So I really enjoyed it. I feel like a challenge is to go back and to watch a number of them, like Itzig and others that I missed that I wanted to go to. And then another one I wanted to highlight was the blogging one. Some of you have blogs and websites already, and I don't. And I think I can learn better if I start to do that. And the session on blogging was fantastic. It was excellent.
Who was that? Who was that?
It was Sword to Communications. I forget the person's name. I'll look it up right now.
Oh, Blythe Morrow?
Yes, that was it. About telling a story and about you being the hero of your own story, and then having a, like Kevin, you kind of did this the other day. Like, okay, well, what if you have this problem? Well, this window function will solve it. It was neat. It was good. So I was very grateful, and that it was free because I know it's an expensive summit. So, huge value. So, and I got good feedback on mine. I mean, valuable feedback. Wasn't 100% good, but it was constructive, and I got a decent amount of people watching mine. So that was a good first time experience for me.
I watched some sessions after the summit also. I watched the one that Kevin moderated by Raymond Kim on what do you do when you're out of work. I think I think that's extremely useful for anybody to watch. Lots of good tips there. And a great talk.
Yeah, Ray did a really good job with that session, and I definitely recommend it. It's one of those that I wish we had an extra 15, 20 minutes to even get more questions and answers in.
Right.
But that's worth watching regardless of your current job status. Marshall
Yeah, 'cause
mentions
you
that.
never know.
Oh, go ahead, Tracy.
Yeah, because you just never know with job situations, even with, because with the pandemic and stuff, things happen with businesses, and just in general, things happen over the years. I've been laid off a few times, so it's good to have, the knowledge to know what to do in those situations.
Yes. I fully agree.
Yeah, definitely. And it's one of the things that we've learned in the last 18 months or so, the last 18 months of March 2020, is that the idea of I'm going to have a job and the trade-off is I take the job because I get stability in exchange for capping of what I can do is not a guaranteed trade-off because that stability isn't necessarily there. Oh, here we are. A salt cat.
I just want to be petted.
Much better. So Marshall mentioned Hugo Cornelis is always fantastic in anything I've seen him present. Yeah, Hugo's excellent. He's actually even better in person. Chris mentions much better experience when it's in your own time zone. Got caught out at least a couple of times. And this is the problem with totally virtual conference, where regardless of what time zone you're in, there's going to be something that, boy, I wish I could watch this. I wish that this person was in a reasonable hour for me. And I guess this I think is the biggest advantage to having the recorded talks just be dumped at a specific time and not try to have a schedule of pre-recorded talks.
Right.
Where, yeah, if you're in Mountain Time,
You watch it with other people.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Yeah, that could have been done.
Yep. Or if you want to hear like Paul White or Rob Farley talk, and you don't want to be 14 hours off, that hey, just watch the video whenever. Now the live sessions, obviously, they're going to be at specific hours, conducive to hopefully the majority of the audience, but in those cases, you're going to have some group of people who are always going to have problems. Like if there's a session at 9 a.m. Eastern, hey, that's really good for people in the East, less good for people in the West. It's 3 a.m. in Hawaii, but at the same time, it's 3 p.m. in Berlin at that point. And if you go further east, you're talking 4, 5, 6 p.m. So there's never going to be an ideal time for any talk for everybody. And that's just the unfortunate downside of having virtual events.
I thought the Microsoft group sessions were also extremely well done. The ones I attended, especially with Bob Ward moderating with the PM team, that was really, really good. Mostly about 2022, lots of people asking questions about why they prioritize and how they prioritize, and that was very interesting and quite an illuminating discussion. Rather than just tech questions, there were lots of people asking about, I wanted this feature 3 years ago and you haven't touched it yet, and why is that happening, and all that kind of stuff.
Yep.
It was a good listen.
I got one of my features.
Which one's that?
Query store on read-only replicas and APs.
Oh, yeah.
I asked for that a long time ago.
I'm glad that it's there. It makes a whole lot of sense to have, and so good to see that it's there. Now, I'll be interested to see if you can get aggregated stats from both sides.
Yeah, I'm interested to see how it works too. I want to see it. Get my hands on it.
Well, once those CTPs start coming out, then I guess we'll have an opportunity. So speaking of that, a little bit of getting ahead, the next week was Live 360 in Orlando, and Bob was down there as well. So I got to see the 2022 stuff that he demoed there. And there was this little tiny bit on one of the slides that talked about approximate percentile cont and approximate percentile discrete. So continuous and discrete percentiles, approximates. I had to ask him about it. There's nothing that's available on what it means, what the values look like, what the error rate is, how fast it is. But given that the percentile calculations are pretty slow today, and that's being generous, I am definitely interested in seeing what that looks like. I guess we'll have to wait to see until more information comes out. So Marshall asks, could you use our open source QDS dashboard to aggregate query store information from AG instances? That will be an interesting question. And my initial thought would be probably. I don't
think the dashboard is open sourced, Marshall. I think the only thing that is open sourced is what Pablo made, the queries, the DMB based queries. I don't think the piece we have, the Power BI, the dashboard is on open source.
The reports aren't out there.
Reports are out there now?
No.
Oh, I didn't know that.
No, the reports aren't out there. They're not.
They're not there. Yeah, that's what I said.
Yeah.
That's not outsourced, yeah.
Because I've been recommending it to people, so that's part of my query store talk.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but as far as at least calculation of that data goes, collection of that data goes, I don't think there would be a problem, but we're always gonna have to wait and see until the bits come out. And
You should be able to do it. You're just gonna have to write a little bit more code to do it.
potentially. I'm not writing it, so it's easy. I
But
think
you're
that's how
gonna
it
have to
works.
know all the servers are in the AG, so there's gonna have to be something that tells it, hey, go get all the servers in the AG. Because right now you're just pointing at one, probably the AG listener name. So that's only going to point to one server. So if you want to point to all of them, you're going to have to point to that and look at everything that's part of the AG. So
The replicas, yeah, that's
so
true.
it's going to have something that says, hey, do this and aggregate across.
Right, which today I'm pretty sure this would actively ignore, because just go to the listener, figure out which one is active, because none of the rest are going to be applicable.
Yeah, unless for some reason it actually stores the data back on the primary, which I doubt it does. I don't know how it stores the data. We don't know.
Yeah, we'll find out.
Depends on where it stores the data.
Yep. So Chris
I
mentions...
really liked Brent Ozar's keynote too, as far as career management goes. I think that was the only non-tech session that I actually saw while the conference was going on, and it was brilliant. I mean, the energy to the coffee shop with regards to the current landscape was really very apt, and he divided the kind of tech careers you can want into architects, builders, and what was the third one? Maintainers. So maintainers are people who still learn on-prem and the older DBAs and that kind of folks. Architects are those of us who build things out of stuff that's already built, and builders are people like those who work in Microsoft and make the actual product. Sort of like a rough category, and where how you can choose to belong, what your skills can be, and that kind of stuff. It's really good. It was worth watching. Mm-hmm.
Makes me want to buy some of his courses, but I'm saving up to buy all Kevin's courses first.
It's good that somebody will.
Yeah,
So
that's
Chris,
a lot of money.
well, for Brent's courses, not for mine. I don't know.
If he has to save, yours must be a lot of money too.
If you want to buy them, I don't know if he plans to.
Brent does Black Friday sales.
Yes.
Just saying.
Yep.
Kevin probably doesn't.
No, that's true. My prices are always high. Yeah, Brent has historically had a big Black Friday sale, and actually I think it's going on right now.
It's the last one.
Actually, he could hire me for marketing. Brent, they call it Brent Fridays.
There you go. So Chris mentions, I didn't see the session by Intel that should make compression better and needing less CPU. Yeah, that is Intel Technologies, and I didn't really see it either. But it does. My high level reading of it was, this is a good thing for the next generation of compute.
So for those people who are not in the cloud, there were a lot of sessions on both AWS and Azure and beginner level sessions. I moderated a couple of the Azure beginner level sessions because I don't know much of that, and I really found it useful.
Excellent. Yeah, that's a good topic. Those skills are going to be useful, even if you don't like the cloud at all. It's still good to have some understanding of it. Know your enemy.
Right.
And also realizing that, hey, here are specific use cases where this makes sense. Here are specific use cases where it doesn't make sense.
Mm-hmm.
Even getting into things like spot instances that a lot of people still don't really know about or think about, and how that can save you a whole bunch of money. Actually, I have a blog post queued up for about 3 weeks from now where I go into a lot of detail on spot instances and how you can save 60 to 90% on VM costs, as long as you're willing to get bumped off at any point in time. So write your code in a way that you get the signal and it immediately shuts down, let the VM die, and then have a little script that continuously checks, hey, can I get back in? Can I get back in? And then get back in, and, well, as long as you don't need to be up 100% of the time, that's a really price-effective way of getting VM work done.
It's pretty cool.
But also, that was an opportunity for me to talk about spot markets, and I'm not going to miss up on an opportunity to talk about spot markets.
That's what your firm does, right?
No,
Part of what they
but that's my
just like
part of my background is that whole economics thing. So talking about commodity pricing and spot pricing. So yeah, that was past Summit. That was a really interesting conference. I think Redgate did pull it off pretty well. There were communications problems, which says it wasn't just old past that had communications problems.
The worst part to me was the way the software worked. Some sessions are on Zoom, some sessions are on that whatever is native to that thing, and you go via backdoor to moderate it. Others, you just get on a Zoom call and engage in a conversation. And I don't know what was the idea behind that kind of a mix-up, but it wasn't fun for people who had to do it.
Well, there were two different interfaces to get in that the speaker had to choose from. So that's probably what it had to do with.
So why that kind of choice and all of that? I don't know. Why not standardize on any one thing and make it simple? I don't.
Yeah, I don't know either.
Plus, the inability to DM anyone while you're on the call was very aggravating, because we had people, I didn't run into anybody who was particularly malicious, but we had a lot of ignorant people who would start to lecture the attendees on what they thought the solution to something should be and everything while the talk was going on, and giving tips and everything, instead of considering it as it's the speaker's place to respond, even if you know the answer. It's their talk, so there was no way you could DM someone and say, hey, please let them respond, and you can share your thoughts on it maybe after that at least, or save it for something else. No DM. That was very annoying.
See, I've never had that happen before when I've moderated. So.
And it seemed like for some of the ones I was in, when you asked questions, like it seemed like when you sent it, it was like, are you sure you want to send this? And then I thought maybe somebody was reviewing it, but
yeah, it was also whatever, because there was no DM, whatever. Some speakers also didn't know that whatever they are responding to is actually, it'll pop up as a model, a little thing on the window, visible to everybody. So what were your response?
Yeah, I got that sense that the people who were conducting
Right.
didn't have an easy time reading the comments.
Right.
Yep, there was a moderating tool that I used. So I did not use it for the pre-con on Monday. I did use it for the session on Friday, but then the whole thing was, here is a question, and it's pending, and every single one, as soon as I saw the question, accept. I mean, I get the idea that, you know, if somebody came in and was putting in something really awful, that you could reject it. So I was okay with just hitting accept over and over and over. But there was something where, did I really need this other tool to do the work?
Yeah. Good question, Kevin. That was my thought too. Yeah.
And I mean, in the end, I think that worked out all right. There were some difficulties, some challenges. Like, I actually did not know how to share my screen for the first Q&A session, and it took about 5 to 10 minutes for somebody in chat to helpfully point out that the thing that I was constantly looking at was the thing that would allow me to share my screen. But I looked at it. I'd looked at it a couple of times. Like, I don't see how to share the screen on here. I see tools, and there's this whole list of tools, and I just must have missed.
I didn't find it either, and we just talked through it. Like, Louis was there, and I was there. We finally, when I was almost done, somebody showed me that, but I couldn't find it. It wasn't intuitive at all.
Yep. Someone saved me about 10 minutes in, so a third of the way into the Q&A session. Before we get to Live 360, Chris mentions implementing polybase against a 6 million row column store table as it only gets scanned, and thanks us for what we did last shop talk. So glad to hear that, Chris. Hopefully it works for you.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about Live 360. The week after Summit, so this was last week, Live 360 was in Orlando. Visual Studio, Tech Mentor, and SQL Server Live. So I was down there presenting, actually did AI-related sessions. It was a good conference. There were a fair number of people. It was probably about a third of the size of a normal Live 360. So still a pretty good number of people, but definitely a lot smaller than what I remembered in the last time I went there, which was the first time I'd been there. But it was good to see actual physical people, humans in person who I knew and could talk to. So that was entertaining. A lot of good sessions there. Bob Ward, like I mentioned, did follow up on 2022 stuff and even showed off a little bit of the product. Showing just a couple of the features that are going in. I don't remember which one he showed, but the demo died right as he was done. The RDP session just terminated immediately. So that was clearly Microsoft saying, Bob, you can't show this to people.
That's funny.
They also had something interesting where through their platform that was in person, but also you could watch virtually. So I imagine that some percentage of people just watched it online. It was recorded through Zoom, and you could watch the recordings in their software and also chat through that. In all of the sessions I was involved in, there might have been one question from chat. So that wasn't very heavily used, but I also don't know how many people were remotely watching the sessions. Still,
was there a remote option, Kevin? I don't think we didn't know.
There was, yeah. You could watch remotely, but you had to pay for the ticket to watch remotely.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, so it wasn't a free option.
I see. Okay. So they streamed you as you talked, like were there people in the room? Like, how was that?
Yep. So I had Zoom on my laptop, which I can confirm. Zoom works on a Linux-based laptop. So 2020 was the year of the Linux laptop. Might also explain all of the other problems.
What distro?
I'm using Elementary OS. It's an Ubuntu-based distro that looks suspiciously like Mac OS, but I refuse to admit it. I think it's a very well done distro. I think they have it very nicely set up, rather well curated, despite it looking suspiciously like Mac OS. So we had Zoom installed on the laptops, had the Zoom meeting. They would have little Logitech webcams. They had sound audio people who were there. They would also watch the chat for us. Not strictly moderators. They were more audio engineers or AV engineers. But things went... It was a pretty smooth conference. I think did pretty well. And
Well, how was the turnout?
well, like I mentioned, it was about a third of what I remembered from 2019. Now, I don't have official numbers. I'm not going to speculate on official numbers. But based on the number of people who were there, good crowd, but still a lot smaller than what they were used to.
Interesting.
So that was pretty nice. I think conference season picks back up in a couple of weeks. Obviously, it's Thanksgiving week, so nobody's going to have a conference this week, right? He says,
So
knowing
the
that.
next summit is supposedly live at Seattle, where it used to be. What I'm told is that audience will be limited as well. Like it won't be on the scale of the summit, although it's planned to be at the same venue and everything else. They're attempting to make it similar, but from what I know, from what little I know, they expect a much smaller crowd, and it's going to be limited to smaller crowds to keep the cost under control as well.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see with that announcement that summit next year will be in person,
Right.
and at the Seattle Convention Center.
It'll be a hybrid event, just like you said it is like. So
Probably would be, and like you said, a lot smaller.
Yeah.
They probably would not need both buildings, and
No.
you find ways, like cutting out the breakfast and lunch, cutting out some of the other niceties that just aren't really necessary, cutting down on the number of rooms, number of floors. So
they said that speakers would be paid to in some way. I don't know what. Probably your accommodation would be paid for or something like that, I think.
that would be interesting.
Yep.
Not many conferences pay for speakers. It's the tech world is strange in that regard. You go outside of IT, and the idea of people giving away information for free gets you weird looks.
Yeah, my wife does
Is
talk.
that
so
the
she gets
SQL
paid.
community though, or is it all of tech, you think? Open source and SQL community are heavily into that. I don't know if it's everywhere.
Oh, it's all across IT. So the norm, security, application development, database development, networking, systems administration, all of this stuff. The expectation is when you're presenting at a conference, you're just there. You're giving that information out of the goodness of your heart or for whatever personal reasons you have, but not because you're getting paid to do it. And Mike, you were mentioning your wife does some speaking in a different industry.
Yeah, she does healthcare consulting. She gets paid when she does it.
Yeah,
There's no
but
free.
in our field, the expectation is no, you're giving that information. And I get it, and I don't have an inherent problem with the idea that because of the fact that, well, the prior group of people also had this, and so a little pay it forward type of approach. But it does strike me as interesting. I suppose it's a piece of it does come out of the early internet ethos of IT, and information will be free. In this case, you're taking it one step further. On the
I
plus side,
honestly thought that was limited to the open source community and the SQL Server community. I didn't know it was all of tech.
oh yeah, it's very broad. Now, there are avenues where you do pay. Obviously, you've got training courses, you've got paid content at a bunch of different places, and attendees can pay for conferences, but usually speakers at conferences are not compensated. Usually it'll be here's a ticket, you get a free entrance to the conference. I mean, some of them are actually really bad where, oh, it's a 3-day conference. Well, you're a speaker for 1 day, so we'll give you a 1-day pass. I've never attended any of those conferences, but those deserve any approbations you wish to throw at them, because like, not only are you taking advantage of the fact that the people aren't going because you put on the conference, the people are going because of the content and the community and the ability to get information. You're happening to take money from those people who are willingly giving it to you, and the draw, you're not only are you not paying the people who are the draw, but you also aren't even giving them full access to the conference that they're making happen. But there are some conferences that do that. I know one of them was shamed into not doing it anymore. I forget. I think it was Denny Cherry's group who had some public things to say about one particular conference where this had happened, and the end result was, oh no, you can go to the whole conference. So that worked out.
Denny's group's not shy about that on Twitter.
Nope. That's a good thing about the people who work for Denny. They tend to be very vocal. They have opinions. They're willing to share them.
Yep.
Speaking of opinions, Mike, you had some opinions that actually I'm gonna read this out. I believe these are your notes from a talk, right?
This is from a slide. I actually got the slide deck.
Oh, okay. So notes from a talk, and because it's not about the person, we're not going to talk about who it is unless you want to mention it in a little bit. But the concept is about nulls and avoiding nulls. Now, as a normalization fanatic, I'm all about avoiding nulls, and we'll talk to you about sixth normal form as a way to avoid nulls. I'm okay with this, but let's talk about why this person mentions avoid nulls. Why null is a 4-letter word, which is true. So avoid is null and is not null, so not just the functions. Avoiding the functions in some cases makes sense, especially in where clauses, but never have a column operator null, such as column1 equals null. Now, that makes a lot of sense. You know,
Yeah, that's total.
Column-
That's just how you yeah, sure. No, that's wrong.
yes.
That's not going to work. That's not going to work. So
Exactly.
Yeah.
Unless you have the strange ANSI null settings off, which you shouldn't do because that breaks a bunch of stuff. But
Or if you write null. in
the
field,
string.
which is-
yeah, if you have a string null, but that's different. That's different from null. Null is not an answer to anything, which is true. But null can't tell you if it's true. So column name equals null. Obviously, that's bad syntax. It will run. The query will run. You just won't get the results that you expect. And if you're constructing dynamic SQL, you can accidentally cause this outcome.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, that's fair.
So
That you can. Yeah.
Yep. Try to avoid using the not operator. So not, and then in parentheses, column name equals value, or column name exclamation point equals value. I agree with that. Exclamation point equals, I get where that came from, but that's not the ANSI SQL standard.
Right.
And there are some platforms where that doesn't work. So it's better to use the angle brackets than exclamation point equals. Save that for the C-based languages and use the angle brackets, less than, greater than. Try to avoid in with a list of values. After a certain number of values, that falls apart. I believe the number is 255. Even before that, you can get horrible performance problems with in and a very long list.
Oh, we have that, Kevin. We have a lot of that where we work.
Yeah, and the alternative for that is insert those values into a temp table and then join to the temp table.
Yes.
The reason being that if you have a really long list of values that are sitting in an in clause, the optimizer at some point essentially says, fine, you want me to scan, I'll scan. This is SQL Server's passive-aggressive optimizer kicking in. That one doesn't always kick in, but every once in a while you'll see it. Also, if you ever see eager spool or lazy spool, that's also the passive-aggressive optimizer kicking in and telling you, hey, you know what would be nice here is an index, but you're not going to create an index because I can't have nice things, so I'm just going to make the query suck.
Lazy spool. Okay. That's good feedback. That gives me an answer on the in. Okay. Can I just jump back to...
In doesn't always do lazy spooling. Actually, in usually doesn't do lazy spooling. Lazy spooling is for other operations.
Okay.
In is more of, once you have a lot of values packed into that in clause, the optimizer will say, I have too many values in here. It doesn't make sense to seek. I should now scan.
Okay. So if you had like 3 values, like in 1, 2, 3, I mean, that's stupid because you might do that differently, but you had in California, New York, and California, Arkansas, New Hampshire.
Mm-hmm.
You wouldn't want to do that. You would still want to avoid that, or is that fine?
No, that's fine. That will appropriately seek, because you essentially have basically a case expression at that point. It doesn't, let me clarify. It doesn't strictly translate to, I'm turning this into a case expression. Instead, you will have an or statement, like the notes here say, but that is okay, because if you have a relatively small number, the optimizer will still say, go for this item, go for this item, go for this item. So the optimizer is pretty smart about that. It's when you have larger and larger lists that eventually it says, I have so many things here, I'm done. Forget it. We're just going to scan the whole.
And so if you're trying to avoid not in list, not New Hampshire, Arkansas, California, what would you do instead of that? Or is that still okay?
Okay, so the not in is a little bit of a different story, because you're going to be much more likely to end up just scanning. And depending on what the cardinality of values is with respect to your states in that case, if those 3 states happen to be 99% of your data, then it could still make sense to say not in. And in fact, it could actually make sense to have a filtered index where your not in clause is part of that filtered index. And that way you're scanning the much smaller index. Then we get into a whole nother discussion about filtered indexes and how they could be so much better. We'd have to get into a discussion of how code has a really difficult time handling filtered indexes because you can't have parameters access filtered indexes, as the optimizer doesn't know that the parameter really will satisfy the filtered index. So if you have state list, and let's say the state list was, or even if it's just a single state name, at state name as a parameter for your stored procedure, and you said where state name is not equal to at state name, you could not use a filtered index in that case, because if your filtered index is saying where state name not equal to New Hampshire, then you wouldn't be able to guarantee to the optimizer, when I run this query, that at state name will actually be New Hampshire, which ends up resulting in, if you try to use an index hint with the filtered index on that query, you will actually get an error. You will get a runtime error that will say that you can't use the filtered index in this case. And if you don't specify the index, you will never use the filtered index on that query. The only time that you can use the filtered index is when you have an explicit non-parameterized filter in your where clause that matches the filtered index itself.
Okay.
And if you have not in values that are not user defined, if they are specific values where, like, for example, you have status codes and you want to see the status codes that are not in canceled, evicted, burned in a fire, shot out of a cannon, then if those are specialized hard-coded values and your query says not in 0136, then you could have a filtered index where it's not in 0136, and your query, as long as you hard match not in 0136, you could use that filtered index. So some databases have special optimizer handling for in lists with a limited number of values. I'm not sure if SQL Server has that or not. I believe the answer is no. What I do know is that after a certain size, after a certain number of values in there, the optimizer does essentially say, I'm done. So it's not that for 1 to 12 values, we handle it this way. For 13 to 25, we handle it this way. It's more of do the best that I can, but you've given me so many values that I don't think it makes sense to try to seek anymore. That the sum number of rows is greater than whatever percentage is my cutoff for stop trying to seek, start trying to scan. So let's see. The next bit on this was that always review truncate, upper, lower, and other seemingly safe or innocuous function calls. That makes sense. Those function calls may or may not be sargeable. Sargeable, right. Fancy word for can make into a sergeant. Actually, Chad Callahan had a blog post talking about sargeability, and he started out with, I hope I'm not the only person who, whenever I hear sargeable, thinks of sergeants. And Chad is not the only person.
I do too.
Yeah. So I think of sargeability as like very gruff and deep voice and authoritative.
So is it I don't even know if that's the right way to say it. Is you say the G as the J in that? I've always said as sargable.
You know, it stands for search argument, so it probably is right. Sargable, but right. I see the SARG, and immediately I'm going to add an E on there and make it Sarge, like Sergeant.
Easier.
I do the same thing.
Yeah. So
I just always thought it was because my dad was in the military, though. So
yeah, I don't know. I think it's a lot
more. I thought
it
was just me.
So. No, it's definitely not just you.
I've always said it as sarg.
Yeah, I think the correct
I say it in my
pronunciation-
head like Mala does. Yeah.
The correct pronunciation, I think, is Sargable, but
How do you say it out loud, Mike?
Sargable.
Sargable, yeah.
Yeah.
You said it in your head that way, but I was trying to figure out how you said it out loud. That's two different things.
Depends on my optimizer.
right. WB Dillon here says, I think 99% of people associate it with sergeant. Yeah, I'm gonna go with that, especially English speaking Americans. But it probably is Sargable. Regardless, I'm always going to call it Sargable. I am never going to change.
It's too hard now.
Yeah, well,
We're too old to change.
that's a hill I'll die on. So there are a lot of functions that you may think are just fine. All it's doing is uppercasing a string, and that may still make it a non-sargeable or sargable, if you will, operation. Especially if you think about collations where you have case sensitivity or binary collations, where that is a massive difference. So the fact that you've uppercased it actually is different than otherwise. Even with case insensitive collations, the function itself, I believe, is marked as non-deterministic.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
I think
Actually,
it is.
It might be, because I'm thinking about it as, well, it should be deterministic. I mean, there is only one path, even for strange situations like where you've got the Turkish eye that, actually that might be a case where even then, where you have one capital and two lowercase, there are specific rules for how you lowercase it. So arguably, maybe it could be deterministic, but end point being, as you run this function, it may turn out that the function actually will cause a scan because you're running the function on a query on a column in your where clause, and that is something to watch out for. So I do agree with that point.
Yeah, well, that was a huge level up for me because a lot of people where I work don't know that or do that, and they have uppers everywhere, or two dates, or cast, and I all the time now, like somebody said, leave your code better than you found it. All the time when I go through code, I'm like, hey, this is an easy win right here. Like you're looking for labs and you're like two date or cast 500 million records, and if you change this, you'll 10x the performance of your query.
Right, in the where clause. Now, in the select clause,
right,
different story. Make all the function calls you want in the select clause, as long as we're not talking about user-defined functions that then go make other query calls. If it's something like a cast or a to upper or a to lower or whatever, those things in a select clause are not going to have a problem, assuming you don't have any weird scenarios. Like I said, a computed column that actually executes a function. All right, now, you're dealing with the wide world importers database. B, it's probably a bad idea. But assuming you don't have one of those ideas, one of those crazy ideas, doing that in a select clause, not a big deal. Yes, there is a very, very slight performance difference. It's an extra CPU cycle. But it's not like the where clause where I may turn something from retrieving a few hundred rows to a few 100 million rows.
So I know you have other topics. Can I just ask one last question on this?
Yes.
So for the very first item, is null or not null? Like, so for example, I have like newborns, right? So newborn ID for the patient that's born. Sometimes it's null if the patient's not born yet, or it's null if it's not the outcome is suboptimal, I guess is the best way to say. So I have a query that's like where newborn ID is not null. Like, is there a better way to do that?
Short answer,
assuming
yes.
I can't change the table because the table is like Epic owned.
Oh, well, short answer, no. If you can't change the table, things get, if you can change indexes, maybe, but let's talk about that, because I think that's a crux of the disagreement sometimes in this bit. By the way, before I do talk about that, I want to add Solomon's clarification, which is absolutely correct. Whenever I say where clause, what I really mean is where clause, join conditions, group by columns or expressions, and order by columns or expressions.
Everything but the select.
Pretty much, yeah. So if you have something like ship date is null for not shipped yet, and so you ask, show me the items where ship date is not null. Now, if you put ship date, if you put an index on ship date, you start thinking about what percentage of records are null, what percentage of records are not null. Null records will go at one end of your index, depending on how you've got things sorted. And so if you have a relatively small percentage of values that are null, then it is like something that has a value. And so you could say where X is not null, well, you're now saying 98% of my data. If you have further indexes, and maybe you have ship date and then some other column that is very selective, that is part of your index, you may not get the benefit of that selectivity because you say where ship date is not null. Well, it's going to have to scan through all of the non-null ship dates in order to get this info. Now, if you adjust things so that you say where selective filter equals 8 and ship date is not null, so your index becomes selective filter and then ship date, that could lead to significantly better performance. So if null values are a very small percentage of an index or of a column, then your index that's looking at it, an index that says where ship date is null, is going to be pretty selective. It will give you back a small percentage and could potentially be a good leading candidate. But any query where you say is not null, you're immediately saying, go ahead and scan 98% of the data, bring back 98% of the data, and only then can we filter down a little further. So you may have a lot of pages that are read and subsequently filtered, which Management Studio will warn you about now. So that's a case where, yeah, having that ship date or having that newborn ID be nullable, if very small percentage is the case, then some queries will work, some queries will not work very well. If you have the converse where 98% of your items have no ship date, only 2% of them have ship date, then having an index on ship date and say where ship date is not null can be effective. And you may go further and create a filtered index where ship date is not null. And then you could have that be your filtered index and also have other columns on there. So you may have ship date and you may have exclusive filter or selective filter and whatever else that you have on there. Assuming, again, that your situation is such that you can work with filtered indexes efficiently. If not, for that really small percentage of quality data scenario, you could just slap the index on ship date and whatever else you need, and then it'll work okay.
So one tip I got on filtered indexes from Kimberly Tripp is that you have to keep an eye on the statistics and manually update it if it ever gets out of date. Because the threshold the SQL Server has for filtered index is different than other things. And I didn't know of that before. I learned of it fairly recently.
Yeah, that's a good call. Don't assume that auto update will work for filtered indexes.
Right.
Especially if it's a very exclusive filter. If you have a filter that's on a very small percentage of rows, then you may have a huge amount of churn in your underlying table, and your other indexes may get their stats updated frequently. but this one may not.
Thank you. It's very helpful. Good practice for me. I can set statistics on and do some practice.
Yeah, watch for implicit data conversions where data types are not the same, especially primary key or foreign key for joins. Yeah. Implicit data conversion can be a significant issue in terms of performance. Some implicit data conversions are still reasonably good. Others are horribly slow. And it's hard to remember which one is reasonably good, which one is horribly slow. So the best answer is don't have them. Either have things be in the same data type when you intend to join them together. So don't try to join that in varchar column to an int column just because all of the values in varchar are numeric. Fix your data structures. And hence can sometimes negate best index usage. So yeah, that part I agree with as well. That is a good point, that if I have a hint on here that says fast 20, well, the optimizer is going to look for the way to get 20 rows out as fast as possible, even if it means that your query will be really, really bad, that it will take forever to finish. Because it's doing what you told it to do. It's just that what you told it to do isn't a smart idea. But as far as nulls go, replace them all with 6th normal form, and I think life will be better. So with that, we're going to wrap it up for tonight. Before I do get to 6th normal form, and then we'll be here for a while. So let's not do that. Let's call it night. Thank you everybody for coming in, tuning in. Remember that our board elections are open. I will send out an email probably tonight to inform everybody who's not watching Shop Talk. And we hope to see you again in 2 weeks. The last meeting of the month, or of the year. Last meeting of the year. I got to double check if we have 1 or 2 remaining. I believe. Yeah, we just have the 1. That's right. We don't have the advanced DBA meeting this month in December. So just 1 meeting. Mala is going to talk. We've got it set up in Meetup. We'll see you in mid-December. Before that, we'll see you at a couple episodes of Shop Talk. So until then, everyone, take care.
Vice President of Programs, I remember our speakers and how many meetings we have.
That's why Tracy is great at her job.
Love it.
All right. Take care, everyone.
Have a good night. Thank you.
Bye.